Hola Brazil! Tudo bem? That's like, it's been a year since I've been here and that's still the only word I know. I'm actually going to practice some Portuguese here with all of you guys while I talk through the future of social networking. How many people here are familiar with Facebook? You know, anyone here use Facebook? Okay. And I think the other one is Instagrammy, yeah? And I think Chicachoki, is that right? Sort of? Okay. How do you say nossa in Brazil? Nossa? Is there? Okay, that's that one doesn't have a funny version. Look, my favorite Brazilian word of all is Bitcoin. Like, it's, and French sheepy, that's the other one. So anyway, I'm going to talk about social networks in 2030. So we're all obviously aware of all the different social networks there are out there. We're all familiar with Nostr and things like that. But what I want to talk about is what things are going to look like 2030 onwards. And my prediction is basically this. The social networks of the future are probably going to be a little bit more like the ones that were in the past. And a little bit different to what we have today. So if we rewind, and here we have our Instagrammy and Facebooky and LinkedIn, that's the other one. I don't know what the Twitter one is, but does anyone remember the black one? Does anyone remember that logo? Is anyone old enough? No, that's MySpace. That was for us old people. This is how social networks started about 25, 30 years ago. And where we are now is something a little bit different. You'll notice the word I have highlighted is called social media. So things changed. We went from social networks to social media, and particularly with the rise of TikTok over the last couple of years, the way social networks function has fundamentally transitioned. Another way to think about it is, if we go back to the mid-late 20s, the social networks were more social graph oriented. So they were about friends, about subscribers, about the followers you have. It was about creating some sort of depth of relationship with the people that you're connected to. And you know, we had YouTube around the same time really starting to grow very quickly, and it was more of a content platform. Now, in the early days, YouTube was still very much driven by who you subscribed to. There was no algorithms back then. There was no recommendation engines. There was no such thing as going viral. None of that existed. Fast forward a little bit to the mid-2010s, things started to move away from the social graph and started to move more towards becoming content platforms. And it was sort of like 2015, 2016, where YouTube, the team at Google actually developed, I think it was one of the early Google Brain projects, and they developed a really strong recommendation engine. And that actually inspired the company here, which is, I think, fundamentally transformed social in the last couple of years, which is TikTok. So the parent company of TikTok is ByteDance. And they had been doing a lot of machine learning type of recommendation engines for the news sector in China for a number of years. And they built the original Chinese version of TikTok is called Douyin. And they turned it into TikTok for the West. They acquired a company called Musical.ly, which was already available in the West. And they fundamentally transformed social. These days, whether it's Instagram, whether it's X, whether it's Snapchat, TikTok, all these sort of things, they're actually more like YouTube. They're more content platforms than they are social networks. There's very little social networks left at the moment, actually. If you go on TikTok, for example, you don't see what your friends are posting. What you see is what the algorithm recommends. And that's not a bad thing, necessarily. There's a great talk. The future, before I go into that. The future, in my opinion, will see the rise potentially of, am I pointing the right way, of social graphs. Meaning I think we're going to see the resurgence of things like friends, of followers, of subscribers, of depth and things like that. That's not to say that content platforms on this side are going to go away. That's not going to happen. Content platforms are always going to be there. And there's a fantastic discussion here, or there's a fantastic talk, which actually Matt told me about. Which I watched after I'd written an essay. And essentially it talks about where these content platforms really work well. That is for discovery. But they're not very good at developing depth, because just because you got a follower on TikTok doesn't mean they're going to see your content again. The only way they're going to see your content again is if you produce content that the algorithm likes. So as I was saying earlier, that's neither good nor bad. I mean, it can get bad. It gets bad because people obviously become a little bit slavish to the algorithm. Instead of producing content for the people following them, what they're doing is they're producing content for whatever the algorithm thinks is going to be the best for engagement and stuff like that. So that, as I said, comes with some pros and cons. The question I want to ask is, how the hell did this happen? Like, how did we get here? And how we got here is, I think, because of the topography of the web, right? So people may or may not be familiar with this, but basically the web is a stack of protocols. You've got sort of like the physical layer, you have the IP layer, the internet, you have the transport layer, and then you have the application layer where the application, so websites, whether it's Amazon, whether it's your the bank, whether it's your own website, all of that sort of stuff is built on the application layer. And this was fine. This is what the internet's always been, and it's produced a huge array of value, of massive businesses, of utility, of all of these things. I mean, we've got Google. We can find whatever information that they want us to know online at any point in time, right? It's created Web 1, Web 2.0, all these sort of things. The problem, though, with this stack is it never solved for identity. Identity was always something that lived in the application, meaning my identity with Facebook is different to my identity with Twitter. Then I have another identity for Uber or 99. I have another identity with my bank. I have another identity with Shopify. I have another identity. So I have like 100,000 different identities, right? And the problem with all of identities is they are not my identity. I don't own any of these profiles. These profiles are owned by the platform or the product or the tool or the service or the social network that I'm using. And again, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it can get bad if that kind of thing is misused. And we've seen a lot of that, obviously, over the last couple of years. I don't have to remind anyone of what's happened with all the censorship and things like that. Now, again, this is not to say that every single platform is going to censor you, but it can get quite tricky when we get into social networks. So this is fundamentally, like, with that layer, with this architecture, this is where we ended up. We ended up with all of these platforms where you, as the user, are subject to the platform because your value, what you're building, your audience, your content, your profile, all of this sort of stuff lives with the platform. And that creates a bit of a one-sided relationship because all of the value that you derive from the platform feeds the platform itself, and you don't own your follower list, you don't own your social graph, you don't own anything. So at any point in time, you could lose that. So it's kind of like building an amazing restaurant. You've got all these customers, you've got all this sort of stuff, and then the landlord can kick you out at any point in time. So it doesn't give you a lot of certainty unless you follow the rules. And then when you have the algorithms rise up and all this sort of stuff, you become quite subject to produce the kind of content that the algorithm wants as opposed to the kind of content that your audience may want. So these two problems, when they converge, it creates what I showed you a little bit earlier, which is this kind of a situation. Everything kind of skews towards becoming a content platform and people rush in that direction. So I think the next chapter, what's going to happen in the future is we're going to see the rise of more micro or niche social networks. So right now, the incentive for all of these large-scale social networks is to get hundreds of millions, a billion users, 2 billion. I think Meta now, as Facebook, in total between their apps, I think has 4 billion people actually using these platforms. That's more than half the world. It's insane, right? I think what we're going to see, and it's already started, and this is, I should say, this is very early days. This is not going to happen overnight. Even I was stupid enough to think, oh yeah, nossas is going to happen in the next couple of years. Things are going to take time, but we're seeing it. So there's a couple of apps here that are obviously nossas apps, but there's other apps here that are not. I mean, you've got Blue Sky, which is like the app for communists. You have things like Kara, which is a really interesting one, which is it's an Instagram for artists that doesn't allow any AI stuff. So it's a very specific niche. And they've grown to about 1 million users, as far as I understand, in the last 6 to 6 to 12 months roughly. You've got things like Farcaster, which is a Ethereum-based, it's a shitcoin obviously, but it's an Ethereum-based social network, and once again, it caters for a particular market, which is the degenerates that want to gamble and trade and make bets and all this sort of stuff. But you have all of these different niche social networks, and as I said, a couple of them have a commonality which is quite interesting, and that commonality is a social protocol. So what the hell is Nostr? Let me actually ask everyone a question. How many people here are on Nostr? Okay, so quite a few. All right. I'm going to give a basic understanding of what it is, and feel free to use this. Feel free to throw tomatoes at me if you don't agree with me. But basically, in my opinion, Nostr is rich identity for the web. And what I mean by rich identity is it's not just an ID. It's not just the public-private key pair, which is the basis of the identity, but it's an identity that you can append metadata to. And some of that metadata is really interesting. It's not just the data that you produce, but it's your follower list, your following list, so who follows you and who you follow, your profile, your description, your wallet. You can append a bunch of interesting things. And what that means is, because it's also a public-private key pair, as I said, like Bitcoin, which is a bearer instrument, when you hold your Bitcoin, what makes Bitcoin so powerful is that it's in your possession, not in someone else's, right? That's what gives you actual ownership of it. With Nostr, your identity is in your possession, which means you can carry that from application to application. So unlike what we had in the current internet stack, which is your identity lives at the application layer, here, your identity lives on the protocol layer, and it's just a mathematically derived identity that you can own. A couple other things about Nostr. It is stateless. So unlike blockchains, which are a big pile of shit outside of Bitcoin, Nostr is stateless. So it solves the problem of bloat, right? All these other people who have tried to build social networks on Ethereum or all this other garbage, they end up getting so bloated, so fat, that they're unusable. So it just doesn't make sense for that kind of an application. The only place a blockchain makes sense is for Bitcoin, because it is supposed to be money, and money is the most valuable use case on the planet. Outside of that, it's useless. And I think Nostr is very elegant here. It solves the storage solution through the use of relays. And the beauty about relays is that anybody can run a relay in whatever way they want to. And this is not exactly technically correct, but you can think of a relay as a database, and anybody can run a database and you can store whatever you want. So for example, if you have an app that is a little bit more sensitive with the information and the stuff that's going to be posted on it, you might host the relay yourself on your own infrastructure. And you're not going to censor yourself, so that data will always be there. If you're building something else where it's not going to be censored, it's like art or something like that, or maybe a travel app, which I'm going to explain in a second, you might just use AWS. It doesn't matter. That's a different storage solution for a different relay. So it provides an interesting architecture for storage. And then finally, it outsources the money component to Bitcoin. So Nostr just says, look, there's no fucking token here, there's no economic model, none of that sort of stuff. So it kind of decouples these three layers. And I've got an engineering background, and something that's always pissed me off about the crypto and blockchain space is that they try and bundle everything into the protocol. They try and have money, storage, state, all of it in there, which is why none of them actually work. They're all fucking broken. Whereas the Nostr and Bitcoin connection, with storage being outsourced to the marketplace, is a very elegant solution. You've got storage, you've got state, you've got money, everything taken care of by something in a specialist fashion. So what this means is that Nostr is far more like SMTP and TCP/IP, and it provides us a new design space for the internet. And this is what I kind of like show people is the previous one, remember, it was 4 layers deep. Now this is the brand new internet stack that is emerging. And it's going to take a long time to emerge. So don't take my words here as, yeah, all of a sudden Nostr is going to change the world and we're all going to be on Nostr all of a sudden. This is going to take a while. But we now have the 4 layers of the internet. We have a monetary protocol with Bitcoin, and now we have an identity protocol with Nostr, as I mentioned, and that sits on top. That creates a whole new design space. Imagine the design space of the web with the 4 layers has given us everything from Google to Uber to Facebook to all of the big products and services that we use. This new design space is going to give us something else. That's why I think it's a very important time in the future of the web. And The takeaway that I want to give everyone is to understand Nostr differently. It's more like a universe of applications. There will be all sorts of different applications. Right now, most of the apps are like a Twitter clone, right? Like Primal and Damus and all this sort of stuff, which are all fantastic, but they all basically feel like Twitter. And we've all seen what Elon Musk did with Twitter. Fucking legend. You know, I honestly think he fundamentally shifted the course of the world with what he did. But people's pitch about Nostr has been like, oh, a censorship-resistant Twitter. Well, guess what? Nobody gives a fuck. Twitter has actually solved that, or X now to be more accurate. But what Nostr does, by pushing the identity down to the protocol, it has given us an opportunity to build a new kind of set of applications. And that's fundamentally like, this is what I've been trying to do. Instead of building another Twitter clone, I've been thinking, can we use the social graph of Nostr to build something unique? And I guess everyone here is obviously a Bitcoiner. How many people here travel regularly? Anyone? Like, yeah, sort of, okay. Is anyone here like a nomad, like that actually travels for a living and that's how you live? Okay, maybe a couple, all right. Is anyone familiar with the sovereign individual idea, right? Like becoming a sovereign individual, having more control, right? Flag theory, does anyone understand flag theory? Like having your residency, your citizenship and all this sort of stuff in different places. The idea here is that there is an emergent community of people all around the world who are interested in these things. Everything from Bitcoin to, you know, as I said, flag theory, to geo-arbitrage, to remote work, to nomading, down to things like I only drink raw milk and I avoid seed oils and I want to go to merchants that pay Bitcoin, all that sort of stuff. There's an entire market of that. And there's probably like 100 million people around the world, in my estimation, that fit that profile. They're all looking for a place to connect. So I thought, okay, can we use Nostr as the underlying layer to build an application where you can connect all these people, you can bring together multiple different applications. That's essentially what we tried to do. Satlantis is a product which is a bit like, it's like a mixture of Instagram, meetup.com, TripAdvisor, Google Maps or BTC Maps, Orange Pill app, what else is in there? Like, I'll show you in a second. So this first part obviously looks very much like Instagram. So people on Satlantis, they can create content, they can post content, they can build an audience, they can connect with people, DM, like, share, do all the sort of stuff that you would expect from a social network. But guess what? You can also go to the map and you can find the best, you can filter restaurants by seed oil free, you can filter it by Bitcoin accepted, you can filter it by who of my connections, who in my social graph, who that I follow or that I follow, have recommended which restaurant. So I don't know how many people here are from Sao Paulo, but I have a list on Satlantis where if you follow me, like I love specific food. Last night I took my wife out to a place called Murakame, which is one of the best Japanese I've ever had here. So I'm going to put a review of them on Satlantis. So when you follow me, you are more likely to see Murakame if you align with my values. If you don't follow me, if you think I'm an asshole or whatever, you would say, okay, well, fuck that place, I'm not going to go there, right? So you can start to use the social graph for something really interesting. And what we allow for is for you to follow merchants, for you to rate them, review them, see their information, do all of that sort of stuff. So for merchants, it's kind of like having Instagram and Google Maps and Yelp or something like that in one place. So we've got that piece. Then you also have events. So I know people here probably go to meetups, like I'm sick and tired of using meetup.com. Here, you can have your events in the same place as well. So people can RSVP, they can list events, they can meet each other, they can connect each other. And again, the events that you see are going to be influenced more by your social graph. So if you're a Bitcoiner and you follow Bitcoiners and you want to see Bitcoin events, you're more likely going to see that. But let's say you're a surfer, you like to surf and you follow surfers and that's the kind of content you engage with, you're going to see surfers on Satlantis or surfing events or meetups or retreats and things like that that are different to what everyone else is going to see. And for me, that's really powerful. That I think is like, if you look at TripAdvisor, if we all went on the TripAdvisor page right now for Sao Paulo, we would see exactly the same thing, which I think is ridiculous because there's 500 people here, we all have a different preference. So if you can use the social graph to make the pages dynamic, you fundamentally transform traveling and nomading. So basically, to sort of sum up here, what Satlantis is like a social network that uses Nostr for anyone who sort of fits in any of these categories. As I said earlier, nomads, geo-arbitrage, Bitcoin circular economies, all that sort of stuff. It'll be a place to discover the world in a way that actually matters to you. And as I said, it's all built on Nostr. So my last 30 seconds here. The takeaway. Social 1.0, large billion user platforms. There's only room in the market for a few players. It's more about discovery and algorithms. These are all become more content platforms, so they're more media than they are social. It's more about like influencers in the 1% and, as I said, algorithms. Social 2.0 is, I think, in my opinion, going to be more micro niche. There'll be many, many, many different products in the marketplace. There'll be, it's more about relationships, less about algorithms, more about community, more about friendships and connections and depth, and be more focused on the social graph. So if you're interested in the kind of the elaboration of these ideas, Social 2.0 is a blog that I just started where I'm kind of expanding upon these ideas. So futuresocial.substack.com. And if you're interested in playing around with Atlantis, it's still very early days. The app will be out in December, but right now it's a web app which you can log in with Nostr, or you can use email password if you don't want to do Nostr. And it allows you to discover, like in Sao Paulo now, we have, 50, 100 people in Sao Paulo, which you can connect with. We have a map, we have merchants, we have all sorts of things like that, statistics, scores, information. So you can kind of discover the city. And if there's anywhere else you want to go, if you're going to Salvador, for example, there's a bunch of information in there. And I think we have about 50 cities now that you can go and explore. So anyway, that's it. I hope that was useful. That's where I think social is going. And thank you all for your time.